I think we should slowly get started, not to have people wait too long. So I think some more people may walk in during the beginning of the presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. This Bigpicture webinar. And today we have as a speaker Julie Swillens. Julie is a colleague from Radboud. Julie studied health science I think in Nijmegen, actually. And she has been doing her PhD research in Radboud with the IQ Healthcare Department since 2018. And Julie has been doing research also in pathology. One of the projects she has been doing is studying synoptic reporting in pathology. And next to that, she did a project with us, so with me, on AI and studying the perception of pathologists on AI. So the title of the study is International Study on Pathologists' First Opinions on Barriers and Facilitators of Computational Pathology. Julie will give the presentation. I think there's some interaction, and afterwards we can ask questions. Okay, Julie, the floor is yours. I can't hear you. There's something wrong with the sound. Oh, you're still muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, now you can hear me.
Yeah.
Thank you for your introduction, Ewan. I will share my screen and start the presentation. So yes, I'm currently a postdoc. I finished my PhD last year, and my PhD was indeed about the implementation of different digital innovations in pathology. And today I will tell you more about our study exploring barriers and facilitators of the implementation of computational pathology algorithms. If you have any questions, you can ask me during the presentation, but you can also ask them afterwards. So first, some disclosure information. I have no interest to declare, and all results which I present to you today are funded in studies of the Dutch Cancer Society. And these results are not published yet. So therefore, I would like to ask you to not share any screenshots or the recording of this presentation. So first of all, some introduction into implementation science, as you might not all be familiar with this. So in clinical research, a lot of research is conducted regarding new innovations, new treatments, for example, but they are not automatically transferred to healthcare and not automatically seen in clinical practice. So therefore, we need implementation research to study the implementation of these kinds of innovations, to study the implementation process, but also to improve the implementation process, to eventually have a good implementation of different innovations in clinical practice. There are a lot of different models and theories within implementation research, which you can use to structure your implementation study. And we choose this one. This is a model for planning change developed by Krol and Wensing. And they distinguish several steps. The 5 steps are shown in this model on how to structure your implementation process. The first step is to actually define what you see as high quality care. You can define this within guidelines, but also according to quality indicators. And the second step is to analyze the current performance of high quality care. So this can be a certain use of software, but also a treatment. And it's important to analyze the current performance so you could see if there's an implementation problem or not. And when you analyze and see there's an implementation problem, you can go on to the third step, which is to analyze the context of the implementation. So you could specifically analyze barriers and facilitators concerning the implementation and the provision of high quality care in clinical practice. And as a next step, based on step 2 and 3, you could develop an implementation strategy, also called an improvement strategy. And when it's based on the current performance and also on the barriers and facilitators you found in practice, we call this a tailored improvement strategy. For example, an easy example, when you found that a lack of knowledge is one of the barriers of implementation, you could develop an educational element within your improvement strategy to improve the knowledge of the healthcare professionals. But this could also be organizational changes and other improvements, of course. I will show you a theoretical model regarding all those different elements of which you can choose in, I think, a couple of next slides. And last but not least, it's also very, very important to evaluate your implementation and improvement strategy. So did it actually improve the implementation of your high quality care? And also how did the improvement strategy performed in practice? Was it actually used? How was it used? What were the experiences of the healthcare professionals or patients using this implementation strategy? So also the evaluation is a very important aspect of this process. So you maybe think, what has this slide to do with the implementation of computational pathology? But you already mentioned, I also conducted an implementation study into the implementation of synoptic reporting. This was a national implementation study conducted in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we already have national templates available. And they can be used since 2009, I think, by all pathology laboratories in the Netherlands to structure and standardize their pathology reporting. And in 2018, we started with the implementation study, and we found a lot of barriers concerned with the implementation of these specific templates. So a lesson learned from this study was that you really need to think about implementation early on in the process, also in the development process of the innovation, because for this kind of implementation of these templates, we were a bit too late already. A lot of pathologists rejected this system, didn't use it in practice because there were so many barriers. So that was an important lesson. And another lesson came up when we try to develop the implementation strategy. So based on the barriers and facilitators, we developed an implementation strategy within this project. And we found out that some elements were very hard to develop and also needed a lot of time and resources to develop a certain element, although these elements were very promising in improving the implementation of synoptic reporting in pathology. An example of this is the integration of speech recognition within this system, as pathologists were used to using speech recognition for their reporting, and they wanted to integrate it within this system, but that was a challenge and therefore took a lot of time and discussions, and it's still not available in practice yet. So implementation can be a hard process. So therefore, bridging to the implementation of computational pathology, we thought it would be a good idea to already think about implementation of this specific innovation within pathology. But when you have a look at the first two steps of the model for planning change, there are currently no recommendations within clinical guidelines regarding the use of computational pathology yet. And also the current performance of computational pathology is still quite low. A lot of pathology laboratories are still, of course, in the process of digitalizing their entire workflow, and they first, of course, need to digitalize their workflow before they can use the computational pathology algorithms. So the current performance is still quite low, but still we thought it would be interesting to already explore future barriers and facilitators of the provision of computational pathology algorithms in clinical practice. So some challenges are, of course, already explored, and they are already known and also are known from literature. Of course, to increase the generalizability of these algorithms, there are a lot of questions regarding validation, internal validation, external validation, which type of studies do we need for validation? Will retrospectively be sufficient, or do we need prospective studies? There's a lot of discussion about it. Also creating trust among the end users using these algorithms within clinical practice. There are a lot of questions. Incorporating them in daily routine, also in different workflows, what will be the best way to incorporate these specific software elements? There are also a lot of questions surrounding the implementation within the workflow. There are some ethical concerns, and there are also questions regarding the legal basis. Who is responsible, who is liable? So a lot of challenges, and I think there will be many, many more not included in this slide. So therefore, we already wanted to analyze potential barriers and facilitators. And our research question was, what are barriers and facilitators of the future implementation of computational pathology algorithms in clinical pathology practice, according to pathologists and pathology residents, as they are eventually the end users of these algorithms. We came up with this study design, so we both use quantitative and qualitative research methods. First, we conducted a quick literature scan. We filtered for reviews from 2018 until 2021. We found 14 reviews stating some barriers and facilitators of computational pathology, but they were mostly focusing on the development process and not on the actual implementation process of these algorithms in clinical practice. And a lot of facilitators were mentioned, but there were many barriers mentioned within literature. So it was very interesting to see this and to also focus on barriers within the next steps of our study design. So based on the findings of our literature study, and also based on the implementation framework, which I will show you in the next slide, we came up with a very short e-survey. We only included 5 different statements based on barriers and facilitators we found in literature, according to, for example, the attitude of pathologists regarding the use of these algorithms, but also regarding the validation process, and if the use of algorithms will be the future promise in pathology. So this e-survey was sent, was also sent via the e-newsletter to several pathologists within the Netherlands, and also via a big international consortium via mail to also international pathologists. And they filled in this e-survey, and I will show you the results later on. And we also, via the e-survey, were able to recruit pathologists and also pathology residents for our interview study. So we conducted online interviews with pathologists from the Netherlands, but also from outside the Netherlands, from different countries, to also explore barriers and facilitators for future implementation. So they were recruited via the e-survey, but based on the results of the e-survey, a lot of people had a very positive attitude regarding the implementation of algorithms. And therefore, we also composed an additional call on LinkedIn to also recruit people with a more negative attitude regarding the use of algorithms in practice. So the aim was to include a very broad panel of pathologists from different countries with different backgrounds, different focuses, to widely explore the barriers and facilitators. So this is the theoretical framework which I just mentioned. When you talk with healthcare professionals about implementation, you often get the answers related to a lack of time, a lack of resources, a lack of money, but you really want to have an in-depth conversation about implementation. And there are several different theoretical models which can help to structure your process and also your data collection, but also your data analysis, to explore these factors related to implementation. So in this figure, you can see several domains in which you can explore these factors. So hindering factors, but also facilitating factors. When you have a look at the innovation factors, you can think about factors related to the algorithms themselves, but also factors related to the digital pathology workflow. When you have a look at the individual professional factors, you could think of factors such as awareness, skills, knowledge, but also attitude of professionals. One level further, you could think of social setting factors, which are factors related to laboratory systems which are used, but also clinicians, the referral process from within clinical teams, multidisciplinary team meetings in which the results of pathologies are discussed. So a lot of factors which can influence the implementation within the social setting. Within the organizational factor, you could think of IT systems which have to talk with each other, communicate with each other, maybe even have to be integrated within each other. And also on the level of the hospital, there are a lot of policies and other organizational factors which could have an influence on the implementation of your innovation. And last but not least, political and legal factors such as clinical guidelines and also policy of professional associations. So this framework helps you to structure your data collection and also your data analysis within your implementation study. And I will now show you the results of our e-survey and of the interviews. This is a very large table, but I only show this to let you know that there was a big difference between pathologists from non-academic laboratories and academic laboratories. Between the Dutch respondents and the international respondents on the e-survey. So take this in mind when having a look at the next slide, which are the results on the 5 statements which we included in the e-survey. And when you have a look at the agreement scores on all these 5 different statements, you can see that there's a remarkable difference between Dutch pathologists and non-Dutch pathologists. For example, when you ask them if validation is needed, only half of the Dutch pathologists agreed with this, whereas almost all international pathologists agree with this statement that prospective validation is needed before algorithms can be used in clinical practice. Another remarkable difference is regarding the statement if a pathologist needs to understand the entire function of an algorithm. Only 1/3 of the Dutch pathologists agreed with this statement, whereas almost 80% of the non-Dutch pathologists agreed with this statement. And if the use of computational pathology will be the future promise in pathology, 80% of the Dutch pathologists agreed with this statement, whereas only half of the international respondents agreed with this statement. So a lot of differences between those 2 panels, but these were only 70 respondents, of course. This is a nice way to explore a little bit and to also build on this knowledge in the next step of our implementation study. And then I have a question for you. I will show you the question and then I will show you the QR code which you can use to go to the Mentimeter site. So a question for you, what's according to your opinion currently the hardest challenge in bringing computational pathology to the clinic? So according to your own opinion, according to your own knowledge and experiences up to now. So you can go to menti.com and enter the code, which is on this slide, or you can use the QR code. Now I'll give you a couple of minutes to enter an answer. see a neck and neck race of validation and trust. So we don't have a winner yet. So if someone still needs to provide an answer to this question, please do. I think we have all the answers. So validation and trust are still important challenges. Also, other important challenges such as indeed the regulatory approval. Not faster. I think that was also a very, very important barrier within the implementation of the synoptic reporting. But I will come back to that later in my presentation. Also taking into account the results we found from the interview study on the implementation of computational pathology. So thank you for your answers, and we can also discuss this later after the presentation. So these were the answers of the pathologists, so both Dutch and non-Dutch pathologists within the interview study. So regarding innovation factors, of course, the lack of implementation of digital pathology was an important barrier, and many strengths of using computational pathology in practice were mentioned within the interviews, as was in the articles we already found in the literature study. But we also found that there were a lot of questions among the pathologists regarding validation. What do they need? Which validations do they need? Could this be different for different algorithms, or should they all have a certain validation or not? Also the incorporation within the workflow. Who should be the provider? How do we choose a provider? How do we know if that provider if it is a provider we can trust? What happens if we choose another provider? Now, a lot of questions regarding the provider as well. Regarding individual professional factors, we found that most pathologists had a positive attitude, but they had also different opinions on how to integrate computational pathology within their workflow. Some prefer to first apply the algorithm to a certain case and then have a closer look at the case themselves, whereas others first wanted to see the case for themselves and then apply the algorithm. So there were differences in use cases among the pathologists and also different attitudes related to that. Most pathologists mentioned that they need to gain trust step by step, that they needed to explore the output of the algorithm and also to see if they trusted the output and then use it more and more and more in practice. And a lot of pathologists mentioned that they had a lack of knowledge regarding artificial intelligence in general, but also on computational pathology. Regarding social setting factors, pathologists sought as a facilitator to inform clinicians about the use of algorithms within the pathology report, but there were various opinions regarding the say of clinicians in the use of algorithms by pathologists. Some said, yes, they have a say because it relates on the quality of our reporting and also on the treatment eventually for the patient. So yes, clinicians have a say. Whereas others said, no, they don't have a say because it's our work, our responsibility. So they don't have a say in this. We will choose whether we will choose an algorithm for a certain case, yes or no. So there were different opinions. Regarding organizational factors, connection to other IT systems was seen as a facilitator, but to what extent there were some questions about it. Also the incorporation of educational activities. Some pathologists said, yes, pathology residents should immediately learn about how to apply these algorithms in practice when they are available, whereas others said, no, maybe in the second year or the third year of their residency, but they first need to learn what is pathology and to do their analysis themselves and then apply an algorithm to a certain case. So also different opinions regarding how and when to incorporate the use of computational pathology within educational activities of pathologists or pathology residents. And also monitoring was seen as an important facilitating factor. Also questions regarding on which level, do we need only local monitoring systems, quality checks, or do we need this on a regional level, even a national level or an international level? Many questions regarding the level of monitoring which was needed. And last but not least, the political and legal factors, development of guidelines, so specifically recommendations regarding the use of computational pathology was seen as an important facilitator. Also, policy of professional associations which could recommend maybe how to use that and provide certain guidelines on how to incorporate it in your system, or other policy or guidelines on the use of computational pathology. And also the quality check, the quality assurance, quality mark, pathologists mentioned a shared responsibility. So they were looking for a shared responsibility, not being themselves completely responsible for the use of these algorithms, but a shared responsibility on some kind of level, also national, regional, or local, or even with their supplier. I have some quotes supporting the barriers of facilitators we found. I will not explain them all, but as you can see in this slide, regarding the step-by-step process I mentioned, this pathologist says it will take a while until I feel comfortable, and I really have to build a relationship with technology. And another one says, yeah, we definitely need guidelines. They are urgently needed. And another one says, yes, we will need quality labels. So there will be a lot of facilitating factors to guide the process of the implementation of computational pathology, but they are not there yet, so they will need to be developed in the future. Also some barriers regarding the inclusion of computational pathology use within education of pathologists. This pathologist says, what if it's not there anymore, then they cannot park anymore. So they mean then they cannot do their evaluation anymore when an algorithm isn't available there. So yeah, they are a bit afraid. In Dutch we say koud watervrees. I don't know the correct English translation, but yeah, they are a bit afraid of implementing this also in the education of pathologists. And also regarding the responsibility, some pathologists think the company will not be liable or responsible for the use of algorithms when they make a mistake, but it will be their responsibility. I think I already mentioned this, so there were many different opinions, mainly regarding the validation, how to integrate it within the workflow, and also how to integrate it within pathology education. And during the interviews, as a last question, we also asked the pathologists and the pathology residents which other stakeholders, according to you, are important regarding this future implementation process of computational pathology within clinical practice. And a lot of different organizations, people, researchers, healthcare professionals, IT personnel, organizations, name it, were mentioned during the interviews. And they are collected within this Wordle. Maybe when you have a look at this, you still miss some important stakeholders. I don't know if it's easy to comment on this slide. If someone wants to comment on the slide, if they miss some important stakeholders they think are important, they can comment on this.
There are two people that mentioned the patient that is absent. It's a lot of text, but I also haven't seen the patient yet.
Yeah, patient organizations were mentioned, but the patient itself wasn't mentioned indeed. and that is quite remarkable, since of course you want to also improve quality by using computational pathology, eventually to also improve treatment for the patient. So yeah, that's really remarkable that the patient wasn't mentioned. But patient organizations were mentioned and patient representatives, yes. Yeah, and I think the more and more you get within this implementation process, the patient will become more important and should have a say in this, and also could think about steps within this implementation process on how to get this to the clinic. So 2 limitations of our study, maybe there are more, but 2 I want to mention is that normally, as I showed you in the model, we implement recommendations which are already in guidelines, but now we explored an implementation and the pathologists didn't had actually real-world experiences of, at least most of them haven't, with the use of computational pathology in practice. So all these findings were more based on expectations instead of experiences. And another limitation is that we only included a small sample of Dutch, but also, of course, of non-Dutch pathologists. But this was still an explorative, this was only an explorative study. And based on our qualitative research question, it was enough to only include a small sample first in our study. And in next steps, we could also include a more broader sample of pathologists to check whether barriers or facilitators are indeed important, and we could quantify these results. So in one sentence, the conclusion of our study, that there are many questions and ideas regarding the implementation of computational pathology algorithms, but there are no clear answers yet to these questions. So some thoughts on future research regarding the implementation process. You could think of what I just called was the quantification of barriers and facilitators within pathologists, but also to explore this among other important stakeholders, as there are many, of course, other important stakeholders involved in this process. It will be important to also explore how they see this implementation process in the future. Other important future research ideas are, for example, to do more research, and I think it's already, of course, going on, onto the clinical effectiveness of computational pathology, to eventually being able to come up with recommendations which can be included within clinical practice guidelines. So there will be clear guidelines on the use of computational pathology within practice. For example, regarding the use of synoptic reporting in the Netherlands, we already have very clear recommendations on the use of synoptic reporting within oncology guidelines. Also, integration within workflow, as the pathologist mentioned, it is important to build a kind of connection or a relation with your technology. So I think also research into the human-computer interaction in the future will be very important to develop a very nice and efficient workflow for pathologists to work with all these different innovations and IT solutions. And last but not least, the data infrastructure will be very important. For example, safety monitoring systems, connecting different systems on different levels, nationally, but maybe even internationally. And to come back to my PhD study, the implementation of these both studies maybe could be also connected to each other and could also help each other within the implementation process. So the question is, should we also investigate all these different solutions on themselves, so do all different kinds of implementation studies, or should we do more implementation studies regarding entire workflows and see which barriers or facilitators are related to the workflow instead of only single elements of that workflow. And I will show you some benefits in the next slide. For example, structured and standardized data could also be available for pathology slides and could also help in the development of computational pathology. And standardized structured reporting could also facilitate that the use of computational pathology is registered and is facilitated on a local level, but also on a national level, so that in every pathology report is stated which algorithm is used, why it is used, from which company it is. So you could incorporate some information on the use of computational pathology within a pathology report, also guiding quality control and that kind of things. And the other way around, computational pathology could also facilitate the implementation of standard structured reporting. As I already mentioned, standard structured reporting costs a lot of time, according to pathologists, especially for dermatological cases. It takes a lot of time compared to narrative reporting, so using speaker recognition. And when computational pathology is used, you could maybe think of an automatically fill-in of these templates, also saving time for the pathologist to report these items. So both ways, these different innovations in pathology could help each other within their implementation. And to end this presentation, I would like to ask you another question. And the question is, what role could Bigpicture play in the implementation of computational algorithms, taking the challenges in mind? And I think you could leave up to 3 answers. So. Let's have a look at the results. I don't know if someone who provided the answer regulatory approval could elaborate a bit on that. So how could a Bigpicture play a role in improving or facilitating regulatory approval of computational pathology?
I did not enter it, but maybe it means that you talk to the authorities and work on some standards. Like if you follow that, then it will be accepted by authorities.
Yes, by setting up standards. Yes. Okay, thank you.
I think actually, yeah, for me that the same counts. So for regulatory approval, you will need to show that the AI works as you wish it to work. So Bigpicture could have data sets that regulators like or approve, and Bigpicture could show that certain AI works on those data sets. So we can have data sets in the system that we do not release, so they are, say, hidden in the system. And Bigpicture could help to validate algorithms along these data sets and give, let's say, Bigpicture stamp, Bigpicture approved, or give quality metrics that regulators trust more than when a company, for instance, would do it themselves or would do it on their own data. And also we have quite some parties that are connected to regulators or actually are regulators in the project. So also the connecting to these will be easier if you work with Bigpicture, because these people are already in the loop.
Yes, that also, I think, relates to bring stakeholders together, which is also mentioned as an answer in this word cloud. Could you maybe say, you or maybe someone else, which stakeholders are together within the Bigpicture and how do they collaborate with each other? Are there meetings or, of course, these webinars are there, but are there other initiatives on stakeholder collaboration within Bigpicture?
Maybe Kirsten can. Kirsten is on the stakeholder or the community management. So we have, as Katrien says, lots of them. We have large companies, large pharma companies mostly. We also have a lot of smaller companies, SMEs. Of course, we have a lot of academics. We also have non-academic hospitals. And then we have regulatory bodies, also professional organizations. We have people that are specialized in, for instance, the legal part of data sharing, so a law firm, for instance. We have software companies, biobank people.
Do you also have patients? Because that was mentioned as an important stakeholder.
We do have patients, yes. We have
okay.
Patients in our advisory board, not many. And actually it was not easy to get patients included in this, but we do have patients that advise. So they are really in an advisory role. So they will be informed about project progress and they will advise us on how they feel about it, if they see any things that we could improve or connect to certain initiatives.
Yes. I also see an answer of silo removal. I don't know if someone could elaborate on that one. I think that's an interesting one.
Unfortunately, we can't see who put it there.
No, I can't either.
Name and shame. Anyone wants to reply to that? Silo removal. Silo removal, yeah. I probably can explain it, but I didn't put it there. The thought in pathology is that actually there is a lot of data, but it's very much locked up. So for instance, we in Radboud have lots of data for research, lots of clinical data from our patient care. But anyone that would like to use it has to go through a lot of hassle getting to that data, if even possible. So they would have to talk to us. There have to be legal agreements, a lot of stuff. And then they would get access to some data. If you want to have data from, let's say, for AI development from 10 different parties, or even more than that, you have to go through that process 10 times. You have to really negotiate, discuss with 10 different parties, with 10 different legal departments, clinicians, privacy officers, whatever is involved. The the great thing about Bigpicture is that once the data is in Bigpicture, basically there is one uniform way of working. So if an AI company or a researcher or a pharmaceutical company wants to use data, it should be very clear that there is a protocol. It should be very clear what data they may get access to, and also what is needed to get access to that data. So they don't have to do the same exercise 10 times. It's not that every partner that has data has to reinvent the wheel. But there is a clear protocol, and it's very clear for every party, for every stakeholder, what is the process to get people to the data if they are allowed to get access to it. Rick, do you want to add to that?
No, not really. I had another question. So I hope the chair allows me to ask.
Yes, go on.
So I was curious. All the way in the beginning, you mentioned that there was quite a difference in participation in your questionnaire, in your survey, from academic versus non-academic, when you look at the Netherlands versus other countries. And how do you think that affects the results of your study? Can you explain some of the differences by that observation, by the difference in the participants?
Go back to the slide, and we weren't able to do a sub-analysis on the difference between non-academic and academic pathologists, as there was also an option. This was a free option, so it wasn't mandatory to give an answer to this question within the e-survey, because we wanted to have as quick as possible, as many answers as possible. So we really set up a very short e-survey and wanted to have just a little questions in it. So there was one question in it based on all these different characters. So also if you are a generalist or specialist, if you were male, female, if you were non-academic, academic, but not all the responders to the e-survey responded on the question, because they could also leave it open. So we also had this group unknown, which is also shown in this slide, which was 32% and also 65%. So we weren't able to do a sub-analysis on the non-academic or academic pathologist groups. We were also only able to do a sub-analysis and to see what difference were between the Dutch and the international operating pathologists. But I think that will be interesting to have a look at it in the future, because I think there will be important differences between those two based on the findings of our previous implementation study among synoptic reporting, in which we also found different barriers related to non-academic and academic pathologists. And an example of that was the content of the templates. Some are very long and have a lot of mandatory items. And in academic, they like that, but in non-academic, they weren't very in favor of these very long lists. They only needed a couple. They wanted a shorter list of mandatory items, for example. So there were some differences between academic and non-academic. And I think there will also be examples of barriers or facilitators between these groups, but I cannot tell them.
Okay, are there any other questions from anyone in the audience? So I was a bit, so it's interesting to see in the first question you asked, Julie, that two things popped up, right? Mm-hmm. So one is validation and the other one is trust.
Yes.
And my feeling is these are a bit, maybe this is not a question to you, but mostly to the pathologists in the audience. For me, these are a bit two sides of the same medal, right? I could imagine if we have more validation, that we also have more trust. But I'm not sure if that's enough to really create trust. So I would like to see if there's anyone that feels that this is the case, or is there more to it than trust? And maybe you also have an opinion on this, Julie. But would that be enough, or what do we have? What do you have to do to create trust among pathologists to really feel that AI can be used?
Yeah, I think based on the results of the interviews, they also mentioned this step-by-step approach they needed to gain trust. And also regarding the validation, a lot of pathologists wanted to, even if there was some kind of other validation by the company or by a national body, they also wanted to do their local validation. And they also wanted to see it for themselves, what the output was, to evaluate the output for themselves, to have an own opinion and not be base their opinion based on the output or the validation of a company or an external body. They wanted to see it for themselves first and then make a decision if they would use it in practice, yes or no.
Which also seems to relate to what is written there as skepticism, right?
Yes.
First, really have to see it themselves before they trust it. And
yes. Yeah, so I think that one is pretty accurate, yes.
Yeah.
May I say something?
Sure.
Of course.
As a pathologist, yes, of course, the trust is very important. And I totally would join the group of the pathologists who said that they would like to try it themselves. That totally makes sense to me. But what I would add here, it would be that it depends on what kind of algorithms are offered for use, because there are these algorithms that could be used as tools to help our everyday work. I can take a very basic, simple example. For instance, an algorithm that would evaluating the proliferation index or things like that, that would be very easy to use and to validate and to accept. I think it would be much easier. But if we are speaking about algorithms as prognostic tools that would predict outcomes and things like that, then I think it would be much more complicated to trust, and it would take much more time, and it would need to be used almost prospectively, I would say. So basically, I think it depends on what tools we are speaking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
Makes perfect sense, I think.
Yes.
I think in light of that, Julie, you didn't show it, but you started the interviews, I think, with showing a demo of some algorithms, right?
Yes, I did.
And how far do you think that also colors a bit the answers that you get? So if you would give an algorithm, as we just mentioned, that is very straightforward, right? You can just see on the screen that it does what you expect it to do. That probably gives people the feeling, yeah, sure, I can control it, I can understand it. But if you would give an algorithm that's very high level, it just takes a slide and gives a score on whatever prognosis, which is much harder to comprehend. I could imagine also that influences a bit the perception of pathologists to your questions.
Yes, it does. And I think we also discussed during one interview different algorithms and also the trust and the validation, also their place within the workflow. If it's only counting something, for example, then a lot of pathologists say, oh yeah, just start the algorithm, I will have one look at it and then it will be okay. But for example, we also showed an algorithm for the Gleason grading. And then they said, no, I first want to have a look at it for myself and then apply the algorithm and then see if there are differences between my own analysis and that of the algorithm. But for counting, for example, they said, no, the algorithm, I think I will trust it. And counting, it takes such a lot of time. And I don't learn much of it. So it will be very, very nice if an algorithm could take that task away from me and do it for me. And then I only have to say, okay, it's okay, and then send it to the report.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Yes, and I think that's also important regarding validation. So also the discussion on which studies are needed to really have a look at what will be eventually the task for the algorithm within the workflow, and then also see which validation is needed for that specific algorithm and task, which will be done within the workflow. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can't answer the question upfront whether it should be prospective, retrospective, or it really depends on the use case, right?
Yes.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, then I would like to thank you a lot. Very interesting stuff. It's for me, it's a bit uncommon kind of research, but I think that makes it very, very valuable. So thanks a lot, Julie.
Yeah, I hope it was clear.
Yeah, I think Roberto Salgado, maybe as a last remark, asked if you can share your PhD thesis with him. I'm not sure if you're prepared to do that, but well, you can think about it.
Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot. Everyone have a very nice weekend. And I think, Rick, we have a couple of slides that I should still do, right? Can you share the screen, Rick? You seem to be frozen. Okay, I'm not sure if Rick is still connected. So there are two things that we have to mention. One is we do these webinars every month. So if you have any suggestions for new webinars, that's very welcome. We like to have a very broad range of topics. Also from, like today, from maybe PhD students that did some work or whatever. So please let us know if you have any topics that you would you think are interesting. And then the last thing that we wanted to say, but I would need a slide for that, is an announcement of the next webinar. But to be honest, I forgot what the topic was. So it is probably in 1 month. It's going to be a great webinar as today, but I simply forgot what it was about. But so everyone is still very much invited to also attend the next webinars. And with that, I would really like to wish you a great weekend and see you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you. Goodbye.
Thank you.